The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, and we're recording. All right, well, good morning, everybody. Marco's very excited about this event today, as you can tell. Thanks for being patient, and I apologize for not sending out the password. I didn't realize that it wasn't in the confirmation email, so I apologize to those of you who were frantically trying to get in, and thank you to those who saw my email, because that makes that kind of running into the webinar a little stressful, but thank you very much for your patience. So I just wanted to say good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This is what we're going to call the just-in-time training for applying to the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund in 2020. We had, nobody doesn't know what happened due to COVID. Our April workshop with the state revolving fund loan programs was canceled. And just due to delays, it took some time to get the 2020 Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund Award Plan finalized and adopted by the Advisory Commission, and that happened back in May. But all of that's behind us now, and we're moving forward with this. So today, myself and the panelists here are here really for you, the engineers, the town managers, water commissioners, select board members, and operators who are considering applying to the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund for assistance for your projects this September. I always think back to what my advisor, Dr. Nancy Kinner, said, that no matter what, I get paid for being here, so does everybody else. You can either sleep through this or engage in the discussion. And we, the panelists, really see the value today as an interactive platform where we provide some initial training, kind of walk you through everything, walk you through the changes, walk you through the applications. But then we really want to open up a very interactive Q&A discussion, as interactive as we can be in a remote setting, and really work through the process of applying to the annual program. So you can see my partner up here, Marco Philippon. Marco is a Drinking Water and Groundwater Advisory Commission member. He is a member who represents the New Hampshire Water Works Association and generally all the public water systems throughout the state. He's a career water professional with over 30 years of experience and is the current water treatment superintendent for the city of Concord. So, want to say hi, Marco?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and great to be here, and great to see the attendance. I know when we were all kind of going through this whole thing, it's like, how many are we going to get to tune in? This is great, right? We've got 70 plus now, it looks like. So yeah, and I think as we go through this, right, it's really educating everybody, and that's what I'm here for, is to kind of lend an opinion. I think as we go through this, keep in mind that I am on, as Erin said, I'm on the commission, but I'm one of 19 or 18, depending on how we look at it. So I am one voice. I do not have a big checkbook back here at the plant. So you may talk to me, and I'm an operational person, and your project may make good, valid sense. But again, I'm one voice. So part of today is getting everybody to understand really what the application needs to be, how complete it needs to be, so that folks like me can talk about it operationally to the rest of the commission. But at the end, when the vote takes place, it's not just me or a few of the operational folks that we really want. And our goal is really to have every application meet it, and we spend all the money we have. That's the goal. But again, it's a competitive program. So those that are well vetted certainly take a higher priority, and that's what we're here today to talk about. Talk about some examples, and we'll open it up at the end for some Q&A to hopefully help you with that application to get it to that point where it's complete and it's valid, and it's something the Drinking Water Trust Fund wants to be a part of.
Excellent, great, thank you, Marco. No checkbook, we just want to make that clear.
Right. No checkbook, just my personal one. I don't have that many zeros in mine, sorry.
And so just some quick housekeeping for the webinar and for the attendees. Again, thank you very much for joining. And this webinar will be recorded and available on our website. An email will be sent shortly after the webinar concludes today with a link to our website. But just be patient. It might be a couple of days before we get everything loaded up there. But we'll try to get the slides up pretty quickly, and then the webinar actual recording will follow. Again, this training is for anyone who is a potential applicant. It's not for the panelists, it's not for us. So we do encourage those questions. There is a questions function on your dashboard menu. You can use that to write in questions at any time. Paige Ralph is behind the scenes who will be going through those questions and bringing them forward to the panelists. So just be patient if she hasn't gotten to it. She's going to do her best to try to interject and stop us from talking so she can get those questions to us. She will be reading your name with the question, and as many of you know the panelists here, and really to allow us to have a further discussion with you if we think it's a a question that we couldn't answer immediately, and really to allow that dialogue. So if you do not want your name read, please type anonymous right before you type in your question, and Paige will keep your name anonymous. Otherwise, this is for the community, this is for you. So that's why we want to know who's asking so that we can be the best service to you. And with that, I think we're just going to dive right in here and start the webinar. So, all right. Just a quick overview of the agenda today. We'll be talking about the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund program and really just some of the changes that have occurred between 2019 and 2020 that you might not be aware of. Louise Adorno is going to give some asset management information. It is a required component of the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund if you receive funding. And Cindy Clevens will talk to the small water systems about a water business plan, very similar to an asset management plan. So we have those two experts in the house. Certainly ask questions so that you're aware of the process and what's expected for the trust fund. Mike Unger will walk you through the 2020 application training with some great screenshots and talking about what you need to know to actually go in and apply for the September deadline. And just a little side note, do not wait to the last minute. You'll see some of the changes that we're requiring here today. So it definitely is important for you to jump in there and kind of see what we're asking. And then we're going to go into a live panelist discussion talking about some funding application case studies. And as Marco said, it's really a discussion. You can see the types of conversations we DES have about these project applications, what the commission is looking for, the questions that they're asking, just to give you an understanding of how the process works, but what you should also be thinking of as an applicant. And then finally, there'll be a post-event email with key links. So just the big takeaways, program updates you should leave knowing, funding application training, and then that case study discussion. And I saw a lot of you went and read some of the materials we put in the registration. And the reason we did that was because we really wanted you to take a moment to see what we were talking about and understand the documents before you saw them again here. So you might have some questions already about the application process, and that's great. And that's what we intended for you to have prepared for today. Very quickly, I show this map all the time, and it's really just to show what projects have been funded to date and where. And as you can see, it reaches all across the state of New Hampshire. About 94 projects have been awarded. That's a lot of work in the first couple of years of this trust fund. Over $115 million have been awarded in grants and loans. That includes drinking water infrastructure, special projects, and source water protection. To date, for this year, we've awarded about $7 million. Most of that is in grant. Those projects include special projects that have come in that either are new projects or they were requesting increased grant amounts for their project due to some changing circumstance. And then also a New Hampshire program that we brought forward, which is some funding for small disadvantaged community public water systems. So some pretty good work there already for this year. And Marco, feel free to wave your arms or jump in at any time if you want to.
I will just say I love this map, because again, right, we talk about it all the time. Yeah, we're all over the place. It's not just Southern Tier. It's if you look, we're up in Colebrook and Errol in that area. So there's needs throughout the state. So I love the map. You got to keep talking about the map.
Yeah, and the pink circles are new projects or continuation of existing projects that receive some additional funding. So we've already made a good mark for 2020, or Marco and the commissioners. And then the same with this figure. I will never stop showing this figure as well, because what we're going to be talking about today is applying, and it has changed a lot since 2017. The methods that the commission has been using, the applications, the way they look have changed, But over the last couple of years, the Commission has funded over $100 million in projects. But when you add in all the other funding sources that are combined with those projects, it's an over $220 million investment in the state of New Hampshire. That includes source water protection, that includes new sources, treatment to a new source, distribution, bringing the water all the way. And really, I think, this tells the story that while the applications might change, while we, the Commission and the DES, might ask more from you to include more information in these applications, you need to know it is a competitive process, but it's not impossible. And the impact that this fund already has had in the state is huge. Between the map and then this investment number, it shows you that it is working, and gives you hopefully some confidence in the process as well. I know it gives us a lot of confidence in it that we can double the money of the trust fund and have a really big impact in a short amount of time. Marco, anything?
Yeah, key. Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head, Erin. And what everybody hopefully get out of this is really what we're doing is trying to maximize all of that outside funding. So the process actually will push you a bit to do that, and you'll see in some projects you can get some outside money, some you can't. But really what we're going to find out through this process, what the trust fund is looking for, what the commissioners are looking for, is the effort was put out there to get all of the money that is available out there. So not just looking for, hey, give me some free money. We all would like, some free money. But you will see, throughout this process that that's what we're looking to do is we're just looking for that the effort was there to get all that outside money. And as you can see from this chart, there's been a lot of money that's been brought in because of this. So it's a great process.
Yeah, thank you. So jumping right into 2020, many of you might know, or some of this might be new information, but the allocation budget that we established in the award plan for the current year is based on what's remaining in the corpus. So the corpus is the real parent fund, and then the modeling and the expectation is that 20% of that corpus would be available every year. So as many of you know, this fund was established with a one-time input from the ExxonMobil lawsuit. So as it goes down, this allocation will change. Obviously, there's some inputs to the fund, including revenue just from interest and also paying back of loans, but it's not ever going to be what it initially started as. So that 20% will go down every year. And this year, what was left in the corpus from 2019 leaves us with about $34 million for allocation to the programs for 2020. And as you can see on the slide, New Hampshire Projects Program, we have about $1.4 million allocated, and we've already obligated $340,000, and that's for that disadvantaged small systems grant. Source water protection, we are trying to maintain a very even keel with that program, putting out $2 million right now every year, because just the importance of these projects, and they take a lot longer to materialize with the other funding sources. And it's very important for the applicants, the nonprofits, the municipalities to know that there's a steady number. So right now we are going to maintain $2 million for a couple of years for this program. And then that puts about $30.9 million allocated to special projects. And what we're really going to be talking about today is the annual Drinking Water Infrastructure Assistance Program. As you can see, a good chunk of that pie has already been taken out with about $7 million obligated to date, but still a lot of money left. And I think Marco can speak to this. This is an allocation. It's not a requirement.
Exactly, Erin, right? And I think, I'll get some, some discussion from my peers. Right, it's an allocation, not an obligation. So we are not, the commission is not obligated to spend that 30 million, or the remainder. So that's why it's really critical that the applications and the projects are ready and valid and needed. So that, I've gotten some questions. Well, hey, Marco, you got plenty of money. Just, again, write me that check from that checkbook you might have in your office, which I don't. So we're not obligated to do that. So if the projects come in and there's $15 million worth of projects that are complete and ready, then the commission understands it and will approve it. On the flip side, if a large contamination project comes in and it's $50 million, the commission has the flexibility that we can overdraw that line, if you will. And it's all about, is the project valid? Is it necessary? Is it needed? So that's why throughout this, the tone is going to be complete applications, and the effort has gone out there for all outside funding. But again, so it is an allocation, not an obligation. So we're not obligated to spend that 30.9 remainder, 34 total. So that's kind of what we really want you folks to understand as we go through this process too. So it's not we have to spend it. Otherwise, as Aaron was saying, if we went through 20% of the corpus each year, in 5 years, this fund is gone. Is that really, the purpose of it? No. That's why we'll talk about loan over grant a little later on to kind of to do the good, valid projects and keep this thing going as long as we can. So that's what we need you folks to understand.
Excellent. All right. So just to talk about some of the work that's been done, and really I'm calling it just process improvement goals. Every year, the commission forms a subcommittee very shortly after all of the awards are made by the end of the year. Last year was December 9th. And the subcommittee comes together to really talk about how it went. And, we talk about lessons learned, what needs to be changed, what are some of the goals that we want to have for the next year. And this work all happened in the winter and led us into the development of the 2020 award plan. And the discussions really started out as more of a reaction to what the commission was seeing in the applications in the fall. Was, there's some applications that they just weren't ready. And this idea of readiness that we're going to keep kind of talking about today is beyond just a good application. It's beyond having an engineering report. It's project readiness in the sense of the commission is ready to review it. And that includes you've done what they've asked for, really. You've exhausted those outside funding sources. You've looked at them. You've run them down the line and to try to see what other funding you can bring in. This idea of project readiness also kind of born some eligibility requirements for the application, some very low, easy thresholds that any applicant can get over as long as you take some time leading up to the deadline of the application to get the documents in order. And Mike Unger will be talking about those a little bit later as he walks you through. But that was really the cornerstone of our discussions with the subcommittee is, how do we improve the quality of the applications and the readiness of the projects? And Marco, we can kind of talk about this a little bit more here, or we can kind of get into it maybe on like one of the next slides. But go ahead.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the commission did struggle with some of these things, because it would be, we'd see some of the applications come in and you'd have some of these discussions. It would be, well, if the funding happens, then maybe, we'd move forward and do the projects, and then of course, as you're sitting as a commissioner, maybe you're saying, well, how important is the project truly? Is it well, if we get the funding, we'll do it. Clearly that tells you, it's not a ready project. It's not an important project. There's no commitment from the water system, let's say. So yeah, that was something that we struggled with almost universally. So that was what we needed to address in 2020 is this needs to be a ready project. So that's what we needed to talk about for this year. So yeah, it's absolutely a key point to this discussion.
Yeah, and when we look back at 2019 and how the commission went through and reviewed the funding applications, and again, we're talking about the annual program here, the deadline in September, and the work that was done in the fall. We developed some tools for the commission, and one of those was just a screening one-page worksheet, and the questions on the screening sheet was really pretty much everything that we ask you to put into these applications. And the commission was really looking at what I call the big five, and that's, is the project for contamination? Is it addressing a project for a system that might have a low MHI or a high affordability index, or both? Did they exhaust outside funding sources? Did they maximize those funding sources? So, what that means is, yeah, maybe we got funding for the SRF, but we only are going to take half of that loan. you know, is that really maximizing that non-trust fund source? But then finally maximizing the loan over the grant. And, you know, it's not a bad thing, but I heard some commission members say, if all of those questions were a no, that application might not have been considered any further on their screening sheet, because the applicant wasn't really meeting what the commission wanted to see in an application. That's not saying you have to have contamination to get approved. That's not saying you have to have a low MHI or affordability index, but you've got to at least go through what the commission is looking for those other items. And there was only one project, I believe, that actually met the big five. So, you know, again, that they're not saying, well, that's the only one we're going to fund, but a lot of the projects that they did fund had maybe 3 or 4 of the big five. They had done their homework. They had reached out to those other funding sources. They were taking a loan over grant, or they minimized that grant portion. So, you know, this is the messaging that we really pulled out of last year, and that we're trying to put forward again to you for this year. I don't know if, Marco, you want to kind of talk about what you guys saw in 2019 and why this is important.
Sure, yeah, without naming names. Yeah, you know, and, you know, it does, you know, again, where it's a competitive program, you're seeing a lot of these things come across the desk. You know, you'd see some that had high MHI and low affordability index numbers. And, you know, the applicant was looking for basically a grant, you know, and you're looking at it saying, well, geez, you know, the rates were relatively low, really low in some cases, you know, and you're looking at it saying, well, you know, there really needs to be, you know, responsibility taken by the system. Really, they should take care of those costs, you know, and they're kind of looking for free money, if you will. But remember, we can't modify these applications, you know, as we're going through the process. We either give them a thumbs up or thumbs down. And it's difficult, you know, when you see something like that, when you have other applications that are very thorough and have gone through and vetted it and said, no, you know, we're looking for a loan over the grant, you know, and it's a good, honest process, that will certainly take priority over something, you know, where that's just looking for a straight grant and kind of, as we say, you know, kind of throwing it on the wall to see if it sticks. They're not going to stick, you know, again, where it's a competitive program and there's no obligation to spend all that money. So yeah, there was a lot of discussion about that. It's like, how do we avoid a lot of these applications that come in that are looking for that haven't done the homework. So again, yeah, a lot of discussion, and as you would imagine, you know, if you were me, you know, you're seeing a lot of those things, you can understand how ones that are thorough and vetted will get more attention than the ones that don't.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's, you know, it's really important to kind of put your best foot forward, and, you know, we recognize the timeline this year, and again, this just-in-time training, but, you know, putting this out here now, starting to really clarify that messaging is important for the commission and going forward as well. So, you know, again, if you're watching this and, you know, you haven't been really paying attention to the trust fund and the webinars and the training that we've done to date, you know, really just try to take this home and understand what this program is, and that it is very different from the drinking water SRF program. It's different from CDBG, it's different from USDA, it's different from all the other stuff out there. And I think the commission is trying really hard to maintain flexibility in their evaluation of the projects, but also trying to give you, the applicants, some clarity in what they're really looking for. So, you know, think about the big five. Again, we don't expect you to meet all of them. If you do, you're probably in a pretty good place, but really understand what this means. And we're going to be talking about all of those concepts. Really, this is kind of, I pulled this out of the award plan, and the award plan really talks about the paths for the applications. So if you're sitting there with a project and you're wondering, am I a special project or am I just going into the September annual round? You know, really just kind of think about this program right here. And today we might kind of touch upon the special projects, but that's not the purpose of today's training. That this is really for the annual round. That's not saying you might not have a project that's a special project. Certainly you can ask us questions, but just to understand the pathway that they both follow. So special projects clearly outlined in the award plan, looking at circumstances around contamination, time criticality, economic hardship, and growth and development types of projects. These are non-traditional. Sometimes these are very complex projects. Sometimes they're projects that are looking for grant funds and the applicant is trying to kind of put the puzzle together of all their funding, and they have a strong need, an economic hardship need, and maybe they have a time criticality that their system is a threat to public health. So, you know, when you're thinking about if you have a special project, certainly reach out to DES project managers, reach out to myself, and we can kind of start talking about the process. And Paige, who's the organizer today, actually put together a PowerPoint that's up on our website, and it sort of walks you through, and basically it asks you, are you a special project? And it should help you start answering some questions about your need and your project, so you you understand which path you might be on.
Hey, Erin.
But today yeah.
There's a question from Tom
Okay.
O'Donovan. He'd like to know, what is the long-term multi-year outlook for the program's corpus?
Tom, I'll have to answer that offline. I haven't updated the model for that. Put those numbers into a spreadsheet yet, so I apologize for that. It is a good question.
Yeah.
I have not updated that for this presentation, though. Yeah, I can work on that out offline. Paige, are there any other questions yet?
No, that was it. He said, okay, no problem, thanks.
Okay. So moving into the annual drinking water program, so that's really the September 10th deadline we're talking about. You know, these project types are your drinking water system improvement projects. Many of you have these on the shelf. Some of you have needs that you're trying to flesh out a project for. Maybe you've applied already the SRF program. You know, these are those types of projects. They don't have an emergency. You know, they might have contamination. You might have to do some work to meet the arsenic standard. We want those projects in this application round. We want to see them in, especially given the timing where we are in the year. Most of you have an annual round project applying to. Oh, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, and you know, just for the operational folks, they might be thinking, well, what is that? So, you know, in your CIP, it might be, say, main replacements, you know, things like that, things that are not mission critical, some pump station upgrades that are kind of planned, you know, that are off, you know, in your CIP. So that's really what we're talking about as far as what the annual is. We wouldn't see, you know, it'd be difficult to look at a you know, a main replacement and aged infrastructure as a special project. You know, we'd look at it saying that's more of a traditional annual round, you know, something that really needs to be that. So if you're thinking about that, unless there were, you know, a critical nature to it, you know, which we would need to understand, that's really kind of what separates it. So it's planned kind of versus unplanned, if you will, you know, on an operational side of things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, and again, you know, just to echo that, like kind of where we are at in the calendar year, most of you are coming in as an annual round, and coming in the annual round doesn't mean you can't be a special project. We had, I think, 5 or 6 projects last year that the commission recognized the importance of the project. They recognized the complexity of the project, and they voted to make those a special project in December instead of denying funding. They said, you know, this warrants a bigger conversation, so let's start that. Did somebody want to interject? No? Okay, so anyway, we're going to talk about.
Oh, we got somebody.
Somebody's on.
Okay. Okay. All right. Sure. No problem.
It's Rick.
Thanks.
Rick, you got to mute yourself
Rick.
there.
You gotta mute Rick. Okay, he's muted.
So anyway, but both of these projects kind of, they might go on different pathways, but at the end of the day, you still need to maximize your outside funding sources. Grants are possible, but you got to maximize that trust fund loan over grant. And then finally, you end up at the grant request. So, you know, the way I show it here, 1, 2, 3, this is the way you should be thinking about every project. What's out there? What can I tap into? You know, what can I take in for a loan? And at the end of all of that funding planning is the grant request. You're not starting with the grant request, going backwards. You know, that's not what this program is. It's not a grant program. It's a loan and grant program. So I'm just going to move on.
Okay.
So just some, big changes to the award plan for 2020 and the application process is, again, we talked about improving project readiness. So the changes that we'll talk about today are really born from that idea. Eligibility requirements for these applications. We've included 2 documents. The first is an authority to submit the funding application, and that's really just to ensure conversations are occurring between decision makers, system managers, and other stakeholders that might be involved. For example, a project that has some sort of interconnection or growth aspect to it. Make sure that everybody's on board with that project, and then because the first question the commission's going to ask is, well, is the other system contributing, or is the beneficiaries of the growth contributing to the project? So it's really this idea that everybody should be planning the project together. And we recognize that some of these projects, don't need that level of involvement, but the commission still wants to see that it's not an application coming in at midnight that was just thrown in by, the operator or an engineer at the last minute. We want to see the buy-in from basically the leadership of that water system, whether it's the commissioners, town manager, and there is a document, and Mike Unger will go into details with that.
Erin?
And then, yep.
There's another question. They want to know, do grants require an applicant to go with the lowest bidder?
Well, the grant process, that piece won't be placed in, but yes, when they go through the bidding process, you do have to go with the lowest and most, and I guess lowest and qualified. I think Rick can probably answer that with the more technical language. Rick, if you want to just jump on and answer what that bidding requirement is for all trust fund projects, grant, loan, or a combination of both. Or Mike Unger, one of you could.
I have a couple more questions too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the lowest responsible bidder.
Yeah.
So that there are administrative rules that govern any project once it's been awarded funding by the Advisory Commission, and DES administers the project. It's ENV DW 1300 for anybody who's interested. Those rules govern how the project needs to be designed, bid, and constructed.
And those are also on our website that will be linked in the email. Other questions, Paige?
Also, can you speak a bit more about the AI Portability Index? They're not familiar with that criteria.
Okay, so the affordability index is calculated from the water rate and the median household income for the water system. So sometimes we use the state, sometimes you've established what the MHI is for the community that's served by that public water system. And it's a simple calculation. So the affordability index ends up being a percentage. And rule of thumb, if we look to the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund program, anything with an AI below 0.8% typically is low. So that means your income ratio to the water rate, your annual water rate, is low. So it's an indicator of the stress, financial stress that the users would be under. So if you have an affordability index of 2, then there's either, you've got a really high water rate, or your MHI, that ratio of the median household income of the system users to what they're paying monthly is very high. So for the commission, when they're looking at it, and Marco can probably speak to that, is it just helps them understand who's being served by that system.
Yeah, exactly, Erin. Yeah, if I can add to that, as a classic example, the MHI varies community by community, system by system. So we saw some that might have had an MHI as high as 80. I think Mike's even has an example a little later on. $80,000 to $90,000 per year as the median household income, and then the water rate might be $600 per year. So your AI is in the 0.6, 0.7 range. you know, so and they might be asking for grant, you know, so then of course you're looking at that saying, well, your water rates are incredibly low, you know, for your medium household income. So you look at that and say, really, the water system and the you know, the folks paying the utility bills really need to take more ownership of that. They should be paying for those investments like other systems do. You know, so if you're typically less than 1% of median household income, you're not necessarily looked at favorably. And again, where it's competitive, you might have other communities that have, you know, an MHI of 30 to 40,000, and they're paying $1,500 a year, you know, in water rates. So you know, so there you have, you know, a much stronger case, if you will, for grant over loan. So, but it is key, and it's something that's certainly looked at. In other words, are you paying appropriately, you know, for your water?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of the things that they consider, you know, especially when it comes to a grant request with these projects. So any other questions right now, Paige? I'm going to say that's a no. So I'm going to try to kind of move a little quicker here just so we can get into the real meat of today. I just realized the time. Quickly, the planning document is the other required component of the application.
There is one more question.
Okay, let me just get through this slide. Mike Unger will talk a little bit more about that. What's the question, Paige?
It's in regard to the authority to submit and whether or not it needs to include the approval from the residents to move forward on the project.
I will let Mike Unger talk about that, but it really comes down, so there, Mike can talk about it. It doesn't require a vote by the town, but you know, when it comes to more of a private, you know, cooperative or things like that, you know, it would be whatever the bylaws of that organization is. So generally, this is just the buy-in from the town leadership, and it doesn't require an annual meeting, but somebody has to sign off. Go ahead, Mark.
Could be a letter of support, right? We've seen a letter of support from, say, you know, the manager or president of the association, you know, something like that, something that says, yeah, we're on board and willing to go through the process.
Yep, and we have a form that Mike Unger will walk you through. Okay, we good, Paige?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't really need to get into the detail. There's a lot of boxes on this slide, but it really just shows you where those two documents are in the process. So regardless of the program you come in, annual or special, if you come in as a special project, there's a different kind of flow path, but DES would recommend that you submit a special project and then does it meet the eligibility requirements? So that's really the first exit ramp. And if you don't have those documents submitted, then DES has the authority given to us by the Drinking Water and Groundwater Advisory Commission to basically say your project is not eligible. We are not reviewing these documents for the meritorious aspects. Like somebody who sends in a 200-page preliminary engineering report, great. Somebody who just gives us a planning document that has all the sections that Mike will talk about, that's great too. So, you know, more information is better for the commission, but DES isn't looking at these going, well, this one's not that well written, so this isn't eligible. We don't have that kind of authority. You either have it or you don't. And then same with the eligibility requirements for the annual round. So you can see that's kind of that first step. When we go through all the applications, that's what we're looking for to make sure all the elements are there. And if they're not, then we can basically send you a notification letter that your project is not eligible. I'll talk about more that goes on there. And then really the big part of the award plan for 2020 is attachment D. And I had sent out in your registration, I asked your question, did you read attachment D? And as of this morning, 54 out of 70 of you had read it. So great. I don't know if you lied or said, but we really wanted you to read that because we spent a lot of time working on it. You know, the way that came about was the subcommittee met and they really wanted to try to come up with a calculation or a tiered review approach of how they want to review the applications. And, you know, there was a lot of different ideas out on the table, but again, because of what happened this spring and the delays and knowing the stresses that all of you would be under just in your own, you know, municipalities and managing your own water systems with COVID, they really wanted to try to simplify that process for you. And so they wrote Attachment D as a statement about how they want to review applications. And if you didn't read it, please read it before you submit an application. So the purpose of that is, this is really to address confusion of that grant loan request. We, DES, get a lot of questions. Well, how much do we ask for? This statement is basically to tell you that's not the right question. The question is, I've done all this other work to get all of this other funding, and this is how much grant I think I need, and I'm going to take the rest with loan. I mean, that's the work we want the applicants to put in. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be, well, I'm just going to ask for 30% and I'll ask for 70% loan. What this document does not is it doesn't provide a minimum threshold for contribution of non-drinking water trust fund funds. But what it does do is tell you that the project readiness characteristics that the commission wants to see in your application. And I'm just going to pull up some quick comments. This is directly from Attachment D. You know, the commission wants to be clear that the amount of non-trust fund project funding is important in their review. Projects that don't have external funding are generally not considered for grant and will usually only be accepted if they're requesting a loan only. Purpose of this annual round and putting out this idea of exhausting funding sources is to incentivize non-trust fund contributions for that grant. So it doesn't mean you have to get it all. It doesn't mean you need to come in, you know, you can be denied, but a no answer is still better than a I didn't know answer. They want to see that effort. And really, if you think about it as an incentive program, the more you can bring in, the better your chances are with that grant. But also, you've filled in that calculation better. You've come in with some outside funding. You've added in another, you know, some private contributions. You can take on a loan, and now your grant number is justifiable. You can calculate it, and you've worked the way in the direction that they've wanted to do that 1, 2, 3 slide I showed you. And then the other statement I really like from this Attachment B is that the funding applications that are ready, that idea of readiness, shall demonstrate the efforts made by the applicant to seek the outside funding and have maximized those. So they want to see that effort, that you've done that work. They don't, you know, again, it doesn't say you have to have it. It just, you got to do your best foot forward. You've got to bring in that money that they want. It doesn't mean you're not going to get funded, but it just means, again, think back to this document, you're probably a better candidate for a loan only than a grant, if your grant isn't justified in another way. So Marco, we can kind of talk about this really quickly, and then we can move on to Luis, if you want to kind of jump in about this statement that we have.
Yeah, and it's kind of what we've been talking to really up to this point, right? It's the completeness of it, and it's the effort. Just as Aaron said, you know, if we see, hey, you know, I've gone to CDBG and it's been a no, and I've gone to SRF or any of the other avenues, and you get the no, and we know the effort is there. That's okay. You know, you still can put in an application. You've done the work. That's what the commission is looking for. That you've done the work. A no or I don't think so, you know, really doesn't show that effort, and then it just kind of lends to, you know, the concern with the project readiness. You know, again, is it really important? Is this project really important? So it is key. Again, it is that effort, and you know, we'll always get, hey, how much can I ask for a grant versus loan? Well, when you've made the effort to do this and you maximize everything, and we know you've done a good job at it, the numbers are pretty much right there in front of us, you know, so we know what it is, and then it becomes what is loan versus grant. You know, there is no magic number where, hey, I can ask for 50%, 10%, 2%. It's, you know, we'll go back to the affordability index. In other words, what should be a loan? In other words, what should the system pay for versus what can be a grant? In other words, what becomes troublesome? You know, now rates become very high, unaffordable, that kind of thing, and then that lends more towards the grant side of things. So again, it's all about, you know, we've done all the work, we've gone after all outside funds that we can go after, even if it's a no. The work has been done, and we've maximized our effort. So that's the criticality, and that's why this Attachment D came out this year, to kind of run through that with the application.
There is a question about that.
Thanks. Yep.
Okay.
Karen, I'd like to know, Where can they go to find the outside funding? Is there somebody who we can go to that can help with finding these sources? They're talking about how they have a small public system for 28 homes. Do we really have time for this now until September to get this all done to meet this requirement?
You might not have a ton of time, but again, you can start the conversation with some of these other funding sources. So DES is a great resource online, and we can send that link out afterwards to everybody. There's a table that summarizes all of the funding sources that are available. Yeah, we recognize this is not a perfect model, especially for 2020, but a lot of people do make these efforts, and there is a lot of information out there of these other funding sources. So, so to speak directly to you, yeah, it's a little late in the year, but again, you don't have to have a yes for everything, but you've got to start making those efforts. And the commission looks at everything. It's not a ranking. You don't just get a number. Well, they got this, they get a 10 for that. It's looking at it, the whole project holistically. What's the project? What's the system like? What can they afford? Did they look at the other funding sources? Have they at least started talking to them? Those answers are still better than a no answer. So we'll definitely get the link out for you, and then you can kind of start making those contacts, which is important. And, again, there's a different avenues for a project to come in. So, anything else, Paige?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, Marco and I are going to go offline. We'll stop talking here. And we're going to turn it over to Luis Adorno, who's going to be talking about asset management. Oops. And then he'll be followed by Cindy. So, Luis, I am going to move the slides for you. So just give me like a nod.
Okay. Thank you, Erin and Marco. That was great information and, great conversation so far and questions. I'm here to talk a little bit about asset management. Again, my name is Luis Adorno. For those that don't know me, I'm the Environmental Program Manager with the Drinking Water and Groundwater Bureau. And over the last 6 years, I've been going around talking about asset management and what needs to be done. This is no different from the requirement that we have for the asset management, asset maintenance and renewal plan that the SRF requirement has. Some of you, or most of you, are pretty familiar with that. And once we get to the next slide, you will see that it looks very similar. And that is because we wanted to, that was purposely, we wanted to keep it very similar, one message, consistent message throughout different programs. And you see it with the drinking water, you see it with the wastewater, SRF, and you're going to be seeing it with the drinking water and groundwater trust fund also. The asset management, maintenance, and renewal plan for the larger systems, and Cindy will talk a little bit more about the small systems later on. There's some differences between the large systems and small systems, so bear with us. As Cindy will talk a little bit more later on. But for the large system, it's a two-part component for the this requirement. In the first part, we had the commitment to an asset management, financing, and implementation strategy. And then the second part is an inventory of the assets. Can you go on to the next page, the next click, Erin? So here we see a little bit better, a little clearer, closer, what those two parts are. And as you can read from the screen, it's the first part is done. It's a good faith effort from the borrowers or the grant recipients that you will be managing, making better decisions with your with the new assets, and so it's a better method of managing your assets. The second part is an actual inventory of the assets. And if Erin, can you go to the next slide, please? So let me backtrack a little bit. Again, on the left-hand side here is the commitment letter that would be done at the beginning stages of the loan or grant program. As you can see from there, it's just very simple, straightforward language that basically stating, once again, that the managers will be properly maintaining their assets. And we have a couple of signatures for some of the representatives of the water system. Next, click one more click, Aaron. And here is the inventory portion that is required as part 2. Now, this is it's a template. It's basically giving you an idea for what it's needed. If your system is that much more advanced and already has a program in place, we could skip part 2 as long as you send me some information illustrating that you have incorporated or implemented the new assets into your asset management program. That could be done in different methods, different ways. Some folks send me complete GIS database showing that everything is in the GIS, if it's piping or any kind of hard assets, or they send me screenshots or their CMMS software. So it doesn't have to be exactly this part 2 inventory list. If you have your own method of tracking your assets, and if you have the information that we're looking for it, such as the condition assessment, a risk score, and if you have a method of showing your annual reserves, that type of information is included in your CMMS or your GIS, and you can provide us that information. That's all we need. So we don't want you to reinvent the wheel if you already have something in place. But this right here, it just gives you an idea for the information that we're looking for to meet this requirement for the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund. Next slide. So that was really quick and short and sweet, because that's really the requirement right now. It's very simple. We don't have we took a baby step approach to this requirement. I know there's a lot of states that are going to require a full asset management program for the entire community. We're not there yet. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point. I shouldn't say that. I should never say never. But at this point in time, we just need those very 2 small items to meet the asset management requirement for the large systems. In a second, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy. She's going to illustrate different needs for the small systems. But I wanted to touch on real quick on the affordability index, that conversation. And I'm glad that it came up, and I'm glad that that we talked a little bit about it. For those that know me and have heard me speak at different workshops and presentations before, I always beat that drum of keeping your water rates low. It's a disservice to your community. You actually could potentially be leaving money on the table. And this is one of those cases where, because your water rates are so low, you might get bypassed. There's that chance. If you know the SRF rules, you definitely leave money on the table if you don't meet that affordability index threshold. So keep that in mind as you continue to work on establishing the real price of the service that you guys provide. So with that, if there's any questions, I guess I'll take them now, or I'll be around to talk a little bit more later on. Hearing none, Cindy, I think you're up next.
All right. So Paige, are there any questions for Luis?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm going to hand over the baton to Cindy.
So should I be able to move the slides now or not yet?
I think there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay, there we go. Good morning, everybody. My name is Cindy Clevens. I head up the small system section for the Bureau. We do engineering and technical assistance for the small systems. That's anybody serving less than 1,000 population. So the folks that we're asking about outside outside funding sources, we can help you. My contact information will be at the end of my 4 slides. Just reach out for help, and as Erin mentioned, we have there's a table summary that can guide you. So for the small systems, we do the requirement for asset management for trust fund and for SRF. We use what we call the water business plan, and that is the asset management for the small systems. We have a template that will guide you through. It is required for all trust fund and SRF projects unless you have an existing asset management plan, and by all means, we encourage you to develop a more in-depth asset management plan. You can reach out to Luis. Usually we have, except right now, we usually have a 50% grant for asset management plans for community water systems greater than 200 population. This year is different, of course, and so that grant may be delayed maybe till next year, but something to keep in mind to come and develop an actual asset management plan. In the absence of that, we will use the business plan for your system when it is funded, either by trust fund or SRF. And the difference with the large systems is that we want to cover the full system, not just the funded assets. And we want to start early in the project so they can help you with your project planning. So the business plan is very simple, just ABCs. It's A will be an asset inventory and priority ranking. B, essentially the water system budget, to review your expenses versus your revenues, to figure out exactly what are you charging for water, and is that enough to cover your expenses. And part C is just an organizational chart. So the first one, inventory of assets, we have a template with the common components of any water system, estimated useful life. So we start you along as much as we can. It's really to sit down, the board members with your operator to fill this out. We can help you, of course. And if you have a consultant who's working on the project with you, then the consultant can help you also. So that's part A, is the inventory and priority ranking.
Cindy?
Yep.
Where can they find that template?
It's on the small system website, Small System Help Center. Just Google DES Small System Help Center forms, and it's on the website, and I can also send it to anybody. The second part, as we said, are the expenses. So we have a worksheet so that you can write prior year expenses, projected next year for typical expenses like your certified operator, electricity, sampling costs, those types of expenses. And then some administrative expenses like insurance, taxes, and hopefully some reserves that you're putting away for maintenance projects. Your revenues, what are you charging? A lot of the small systems don't have a rate broken out, so this is the opportunity to kind of look at that in more detail to see, are you really covering your expenses, and if there is a surplus or deficit, so that can be corrected at your next annual meeting. And then finally, the organizational chart, just to who are the current board members, your operator, of course, but most especially who in your organization on your board is in charge with issuing public notices if you have to, if you are have a bacteria hit, who is the follow-up, who is the person going to follow up with those notices and the correction items needed. So just an org chart of who that is. And that's it. Small System Help Center at DES. all our contact information is first name dot last name at des.nh.gov. Please reach out. Thank you very much.
Hey, Cindy, I just also wanted to add you can find that business plan template under the asset management website, asset management webpage under the DES. So if you go to the asset management webpage, you'll see some templates for the large systems and the small systems also.
Thanks, Luis. Thanks, everybody. Back to you, Erin.
All right. Paige, do you have any questions for Cindy?
Nope, that was the only one.
Excellent. You know, what we'll do is Cindy will send out a link to both the Small Systems Help Center and the link to the table that Louise mentioned and myself about the funding options that are out there. So we'll get that information out to everybody. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Unger, and unfortunately, Mike's camera isn't working, so you won't be able to see him, but you will be able to hear him, and he will walk you through the funding application training. Mike, it's all you.
All right, thanks, Erin. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm going to walk through the funding application, the process for finding the application, and then general overview, not all of the specifics, but focusing on what's new for 2020 from previous years for those of you who have applied in the past. There we go. So this is the trust fund website, which you can reach just by Googling NHDWG Trust Fund, or it's on most of our email signature pages, but a Google search is an easy way to find it. And this is the applicant forms tab. Again, I'll make a plug. Here you can find the Commission's construction rules and the 2020 award plan. And it really is very important to read through those to understand what the Commission's looking for, what their priorities are when they're selecting projects, everything that Erin and Marco talked about earlier this morning. The application form, it's an online form. We encourage everyone to submit online. That helps with processing the applications and reviewing them on our end. If necessary, you can submit a PDF by email, but we do ask you to try the online forms as the first choice. When you click that link, it brings you to the state's online form page. If you haven't registered before, you would need to do that. It's a simple process. And then go to the form finder. Click there, and you can search just DWGTF. It would bring up these options, and the one you want is the full application. And you're here. It gives a little bit of explanation. Begin form entry. This is what the screen looks like, and it will walk you right through these tabs. The online part of the application just asks for some basic information about the project, about the water system, and then your outside funding sources and what your trust fund funding request is. And how this works, then we are able to populate a spreadsheet with the data that you enter in the online form for the purposes of just summarizing the data. But the meat of the application this year is in attachments. And these are the forms that if you've applied before, you're familiar with. The online form system gives you a way to attach these either as Word documents or PDFs, and then they'll come in along with the data from your application. So once you've gotten to the attachments part of the process, it will look like this, and then you can either drag and drop or choose the file. And these forms are available on the trust fund website or also on the first page of the online forms website when you log in. So the first form, number 1, is the funding application. This is very similar to last year. It looks like this. Some of the section numbers have been reorganized and reformatted, but for the most part, this is the same as last year's form, except the big exception here are these threshold requirements that Aaron referenced earlier. Form 2 and Form 3. And I'll go through those now. So here's Form 2, the authority to submit a funding application. We had a question about whether you needed the vote of the voters at an annual meeting. It's going to depend on your system's bylaws or organizational structure, but here are the requirements. So the certificate needs to be completed and signed by a member of the governing body who's different than the person that's being authorized to submit the application. The authorization to execute any documents is restricted to a member of the governing body or an employee of the water system. So for example, the Board of Commissioners can authorize the superintendent to sign the application. So the board would need to take that vote at one of their regular meetings. And then meeting minutes from that regular meeting need to be attached. And like Aaron said and Marco said earlier, the intent here is that the governing body knows what the staff are doing and thinking, that they've bought in to this project. We have seen applications in the past where either it was the superintendent or public works director or an engineer, consulting engineer submitted an application, and then it got selected for funding as we got down the process. Whatever board of selectmen or city council wasn't even aware of the project or wasn't fully on board with moving forward in that year. That's not a situation that we want to be in because there are limited funds in the trust fund. It is a competitive process. And if the community is not ready to move forward, then that's going to tie up money that could go to a project that is ready. So this form needs to be completed. These 3 requirements need to be met, the minutes attached, and this needs to be attached to that online form. Form 3, this is also new this year, is a planning document. So the form itself is just instructions. You need to create, sorry about that. You need to create a separate document to attach to the online form. There are 6 sections or components of the planning document that need to be included. So existing conditions, describe your system briefly, and I'll just mention at this point, this document doesn't have to be a major preliminary design report, although it could be, and it really depends on the system and the project. So if it's a complicated project for a large system, then something more detailed is in order. For a small system, a relatively straightforward project, just a couple sentences under each of these bullets will suffice. And the more information you can provide, the better. Remember, it's a 19-member advisory commission that's reviewing these applications. they are not familiar with your system, with your needs, and with this project, and you're really trying to sell the project to them. So the more information, the better. Also, if you've already developed a preliminary engineering report, say for USDA rural development or for another funding source, and it includes these elements, then there's no need to create a separate document just for this. You can attach that document, and it will meet the criteria. And so DES, like Aaron said, will review your application, make sure that you've included something under each of these headings. We won't be reviewing the content necessarily, other than just to make sure that it's appropriate. If there's nothing included, then, oh, lost you. If you have not included something under those headings, then we can reject that application. So again, like I said, even if it's just a couple sentences, be sure to include that so that your application can be reviewed by the commission. I'll just walk through these briefly. So existing conditions is your system in general, then the project need. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. Again, the more data you can provide, the more hard facts, maps, figures are helpful to try to explain, if comparing your project to somebody else who's got a similar project, why yours is more in need. And then we want to make sure you've looked at alternatives and the recommended alternative, whether it's selected based on lowest cost or operational flexibility or some other reason. What's the justification, so that you've got a project that here's what we're asking for. Really early on planning stages of the project, you at least need to identify what you're applying for, so that then you can describe that project. Here's the scope that the advisory commission would be approving at basis of design. So how many feet of water main, and on what streets, or a pump station of what flow rate, storage tank, what size, how was that determined, and then the project cost, and how did you come up with that? Was it an engineer's opinion of cost, quotes from vendors, your operators' experience in similar projects, so that you've done the work, the homework, to know what the project's going to cost, so you're applying for the appropriate amount of money, and then don't have to, less likely to end up in the situation where you need to come back and request additional money, because that would require a whole nother review and approval from the advisory commission down the road. So the more work you can put in up front to define the project and the cost, the more likely then that your request will be appropriate. So that wraps up the discussion about the application itself. Aaron, I think I lost control of the screen.
Yeah, that's okay. I took it back.
Well, trust me.
Great job, Mike. That was awesome. Great job. Paige, are there any questions as far as sort of the nuts and bolts and how to for doing submitting an application right now? And as we said, these are all up online, and you will have the presentation. I'm going to just email it out to everybody so you can kind of walk through those instruction slides that Mike had up there. But Paige, are there any questions right now for Mike?
Nope. I think he answered everybody's question.
Okay, great. Well, huge thank you to Luis and Cindy for taking the time to kind of give everybody an overview of asset management and water system business plans. I think it's really helpful just to keep amplifying their message out there. Yeah, you can share my webcam. Sorry, I'll put that on there. I think it's just very helpful to just give them an opportunity whenever possible. And as we said, we'll send out those key links afterwards. Just so you know, there is an example of a planning document up on the website as well. So you can just get a feel for, you know, what type of information we're really requesting that you put in here. And I love how Mike put the reminder out there that, you know, there are 19 people reviewing these applications. And, you know, DES, we facilitate, we work with them to help them understand your project. But when they first open up this document and all these files I send them through Dropbox, we're not sitting in the room with them. We're not walking through the application with them. And there's a lot of just kind of first glance and, you know, looking at, okay, what's the project? What type of system is this? What's the need? You know, what are they asking for? Did they look at those other funding sources? They're doing that all on their own, in their own homes. So, you know, it's really important to get that information in there and be very thorough with the application. So yeah, just Mike said it, we've already said it. Look at what's required, go through the award plan so you understand. So we're going to welcome Mike, I believe is unmuted, and he'll be part of this panelist discussion. We're going to welcome Rick Skarinka. So hopefully he can turn his camera on and we can see him as well, so you don't have to just look at Marco and I the whole time. And, you know, really this is kind of the second part of the webinar, and you guys are doing a great job asking some questions. I know there are some questions that have been emailed. I'll handle those offline, so don't worry if you want to email them to me or Paige, we will address them. So we are seeing those questions as well. But, you know, keep up the interactive. Paige is going to do everything she can. And, you know, really, we're going to talk about a couple of case studies. And I think what you'll see is that there is no perfect answer. And, you know, DES, we do our best to help, you know, facilitate the commission, remind them of what the rules are, remind them of what the award plan says, and really work with them as they're evaluating these. But there's still 19 people, and as much as we corral them, you know, there's 19 opinions, and there's a lot of discussion when it comes to reviewing these applications. It is not assigning a number and ranking them. It is really understanding the project, understanding the need, and, you know, did they meet the big five? Did they do what we ask? So you'll see that in this discussion. You know, again, just to qualify Marco's rule here, I want to be very clear. Anything he says is not to be misconstrued as an approval of your project. And if you're sitting there and your example is exactly like the one we're talking about, that's great, lucky you, but it's just like studying for a test. It's just an example, and you still have to do some work. So anything Marco says here should just be taken in and understood as just, you know, that messaging, that readiness, and what we're talking about. Some project-specific questions are okay. You know, again, we don't want to get off track and drill into details about somebody's particular project. Again, we can handle that offline. But, you know, if you have some burning question, feel free to ask it as well. Again, this is for you. And this is for, you know, potential applicants. So I'm going to drive the presentation, and just we'll start with the first one. Mike Unger is going to kind of introduce the case study, and you'll see our faces, and then you'll start hearing just how we discuss these projects. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so let's see. This is a water main replacement project. 12,000 feet, 12-inch water main. It's in this systems asset management program. You can see this is a municipal system. This project was recommended for replacement due to the age of the pipe and several other reasons. Came right out of the asset management program. The system has an annual water rate $800, so their affordability index, we had that question earlier, so 800 divided by 80,000 is 1%, so that's a little bit above that 0.8, right in that 1% range. And there's an estimated cost of $2.5 million, and the system did apply to drinking water SRF, but they were not on the funded portion. And now I'm going to turn it over to Rick to ask some questions and open up the dialogue.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. I think this is maybe not the most important, but a really good discussion in the next examples, because it gives you an idea of what where you may think about what you need to ask for, and more importantly, what information do you need to provide. I guess the first thing you said is I look at this utility and the asset management program. You know, what other improvements are they have to make? What is their projection out going forward? And you know, have they looked at their water rate structure to allow them to continue to? They've identified 12,000 linear feet, but is there more? And I'm sure there is more. And then how do they plan on addressing those? Are they going to keep coming back or asking for to borrow money, or is the rate structure set up so that they can start to plan to do some of this on their own, or at least to get some local funds to contribute? The affordability index is at 1. I think the average, the median household income across the state is about 75,000. So, you know, they probably don't qualify for principal forgiveness. You know, is there any local funds that they're willing to contribute? You know, what other improvements are they making? Have they sought any other funding from other organizations? These are the questions that are going to be asked before, and they should be answered well before you submit an application. At this point, I push it to Marco as a board member, and to get some feedback on what his opinion or guidance might be on this.
Sure, Rick. Yeah, and on something like this, and you did a great job explaining that. That's exactly what we look at and what we think about. So we're looking at a main replacement project. This would be a normal CIP asset management program. So we would look at this as an annual program application, not necessarily a special project, not from what we're seeing from the application. And the system characteristics with the low AI, we would be, I believe this one came in as a loan only application, which would make certainly much more sense. It would be a little more difficult if they were looking for some grant on this, with the low AI. Obviously, with the above average MHI and I'll say the below average rates, the water system can certainly take on some of that burden, the financial burden, as they should. The ratepayers should be paying for, the true cost of the water system. So on this one, that's what the commission would be thinking. They'd be looking at it saying, the system needs to take ownership of it. If they're looking to the trust fund for another source for borrowing money because the interest rates are great, then that would make certainly more sense and be successful in an application. But if something like this, if it was a significant ask on the grant side, again, where it is competitive, we would be looking at others versus this one, and this one may fall down, the priority scale, where you do have that very low AI. Again, above the 0.8, but at 1%, that's quite a reasonable water rate for that community. We would feel the system needs to take on that financial investment.
When you read into, again, I'll go back to, we're reading the application on face value. We, DES, but the 19 members are reading it on face value. And in there, they said some major industrial customer, this would benefit from this. Well, have they gone to that major customer and maybe gotten some private contributions or some contribution, to make this improvement? These are the things that the questions will come up when you, or if there are some of those things that benefits, then you should be making note of that. All right.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Rick. I mean, these 19 members who are looking at the application, they don't miss a beat. They read them. The chair reads them multiple times. Then he has his chief of staff read them multiple times. And, that major industrial customer would not be missed. And, that's part of that project readiness discussion is you've got a stakeholder that's out there that's going to benefit from this project. start talking with them, bring them in early on into the discussion, because, you know, if this project walked in and wanted some grant funds, where you got to think about that term incentive. The trust fund wants to incentivize bringing in that other funding with the grant carrot. So here, you know, a loan only, yeah, pretty likely. You wanted to start making this a little more complex and really showing what this project is doing. You know, it changes the conversation about it, you know, on the floor by the commission. So, you know, this is how you should be thinking about your project, is all of those aspects. And that project readiness thought is, what do I got here? What type of project am I really looking at is important to convey to the commission. So Mike, what's the answer?
Yeah, so, well.
Oh wait, I have to click it.
As I said, there's no right answer. But to summarize here, yes, a safe bet would be to request loan only, especially where they're not bringing in outside funding, and this would be an appropriate project for the annual round.
Great.
There is a question on what is the interest on a loan.
Yeah, so the interest rates will be set next week. Right now, they are extremely low, and we were talking about what the index was yesterday, right, Rick? It was like 1.3.
I think it's right now for the SRF is 1.35, but the market rate is about 1.6% right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so we set the interest rates for trust fund loans the first Thursday of August, so next week. So right now the interest rate using the GEO bond index is below 2%. So I don't see that changing. So that will be set for the year. And, you know, again, when we talk about this a loan as a loan only, you know, this program, it's still a very good loan. You have a very low interest rate. There's no federal cross cutters as long as you don't have other funds in the pot. So if it was a combined project that required those, you would have those. But if it was just a straight up trust fund loan, there are no Davis-Bacon wage requirements and all the other federal cross cutters that come with that. And there's no closing costs. It's a relatively simple process. That a loan is not a bad thing. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So yeah, so the interest rates will be reset next week. Yep. Okay. Any other questions, Paige?
Nope, not right now.
All right, Erin, if you want to advance that slide.
All right, we're right, Mike, take it away.
Okay, so this is the same project, but in a different community with a lower median household income, which is, yeah, higher water rate and a higher affordability index. So if you click again, Erin. Yeah, we go. So they're requesting a portion of grant in order to reduce the amount of loan. They were on the funded portion for SRF, but they don't consider that that's an amount that they can afford to borrow. So I'll open it up for discussion.
I think one thing from the SRF standpoint, you know, with that, if they've on the funded portion, that 2.4, the AI, they would qualify for 20% principal forgiveness, which is a good thing, but that perhaps does not get them to where they want to be. So then the question, if at that low MHI, one question I would have is that would they qualify for CDB block grant for a section of the water main that on one of the streets, and then they could get up to $500,000 from a CDB program, perhaps. And USDA rural development, did they apply there, and you know what would be the loan grant package? So these are the things that you know the trust fund members will be asking, but it, you know, before you even get to there, the applicant and owner should be looking into these. You know, and there was a question early on in this, on to them, is it too late to apply? Quite frankly, I think you should do your homework first before you apply. And it is an annual program. So, you know, I believe it'll be around next year. You know, that's something that you should be thinking about. And it's good that you're finding out this stuff now, but you know, there will be opportunities in the future. But I think at this point, if you haven't sought and looked into these opportunities, you know, it may be premature to apply to the trust fund for the annual round. But getting back to this first point here is that looking at this, if they were to leverage a block grant in here, they could even reduce that amount even further, the ask to the trust fund. And then I'll pass it over to Marco and see what you know, what kind of comments you can provide on this.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head, Rick. Yeah, if we were looking at this kind of a similar project, but the characteristics are different. The MHI is low, the rate is high, the AI is much higher. So we understand it. And so what we would look to is, did they maximize outside grant funding? And maybe they did apply to CDBG, maybe they did apply to USDA, and they got a no for whatever reason. But this is absolutely something that we would look to and be very receptive to a portion of it being a grant because of that. This is a different dynamic than the last example. MHI, again, much lower, rates much higher. So yeah, this is something that would fit the bill as well. But again, the homework would have to be done, as Rick was talking about. Have we maximized all external funding? In other words, have you done the homework? And again, a no answer is much better than a I don't know. And that's what we're looking at when we're reviewing this stuff.
There is a question.
Okay.
If you guys could somehow clarify, is it better to have a low or high AI for principal forgiveness on grants and loans?
So,
Rick, do you want to talk on that one? Or just
yeah,
AI?
I can tell you, obviously the AI is really if you do have a high AI, which means that your water rate is relatively high in comparison to your medium household income. You know, the concept there is that you cannot afford to increase the rate or to continue to pay these high rates and make these capital improvements, which you have to pay for going forward. If you have a low AI, that implies that you have some opportunity to increase your water rates. And as I said, I think the medium household income in the state is about 75,000, and the average water rate is somewhere in the range of $575, you know, a year. So that gives you a perspective. And for the drinking water SRF, we use the threshold of a 0.8 AI to begin offering principal forgiveness. So obviously at this example of 2.4, that's a relatively high AI in comparison to what we would consider eligible. So hopefully that answers. So better to have not better, okay, because in some communities, they have a low AI, and the reason why is because they've managed for some reason, their infrastructure and their assets in a way to keep the water rate at a reasonably low rate. So there's no good or bad way of answering this question. It is what it is, and that's how we calculate it. And that's I think the important message to take away is that goes back to the asset management, and that plays into your rate structure. And how can you afford to continue to make improvements, which you have to at the rates that you are? If not, then you're going to have to continue to raise those rates.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, that concept of principal forgiveness is not adopted by the commission. It is an SRF concept. So, how that comes into the conversation with the trust fund commission is, and they've asked us, well, what would they be eligible for if this was an SRF loan? And that's a way to think about, that grant aspect, again, looking at the incentives to bring in other funding, but then also the justified need of that grant. So, it's very simple to say, well, we did what we could. We brought in multiple funding sources. We still have this gap. And that gap is roughly in line with what we would get for forgiveness from the SRF loan. I mean, that's how you should be thinking about stuff, but it's not a calculation that is implicit to a loan if you're approved for a loan. That it's not. It is a grant and loan number, not a calculation. So I just wanted to be very clear about that. So I think, are we good with this slide? Are there any more questions on this slide?
Nope, they said that was a good answer.
Oh, what? I keep doing that. I'm sorry, everybody. There we go. Okay, Mike.
Okay, so this is a small system, and they're looking at comprehensive upgrades, including a new supply well and distribution system replacement, rehabilitation of their pump house based on sanitary survey findings and technical assistance from DES. You can see their rate. It's a high rate, the high affordability index. Again, they have they're on the funded portion of the SRF. And Aaron, if you click forward one, you'll see, like the previous project, looking for grant to reduce the amount of loan that they need. So I'll open it up.
And I think this is coming.
Oh, we lost Rick.
I can't hear him either.
Can you hear me, Aaron?
Aaron?
We could hear you, Marco.
Okay.
That's the practical approach. And so, one of the things the commission has been highlighting is the need for source development. And if you provide assistance to help a community develop a source or replace a source due to contamination or just the need, then maybe the community can then take the rest of it and work with it. The other point to make is that, have you gone to other funding sources and what's the opportunities there? And Marco, I'll pass it on to you at this point for any comments.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Rick. Yep, yeah, and this one, clear case. If you look at the AI, it is a high AI, right? So these folks are paying $2,000 a year currently. So they're looking for some relief. So we would look at the application, understanding it's a full system upgrade. So we're looking at the supply side. We're looking at some main replacement, pump house rehab. So this is probably something that came from the asset management side of the world. So we would think it would potentially be more than likely an annual round, unless there was some extenuating circumstance and it came in as a special project. But either way, it would certainly be looked at. And again, so now you start looking at the thoroughness of the application. Have they looked for that outside grant funding? And if they have, yes. What was available from these other sources, and then what's the gap? And then we would certainly look at what the ask is on the grant portion of this. So yeah, this would be one that would make sense for a portion of grant versus loan. And again, what that number would be, as Aaron said, it's not a generic number. It's once everything is maximized and everything is looked at on the funding side, then we look at what the ask is, and if it makes sense, then you know, we certainly take it under advisement for a vote. But as Aaron said, I think it was very key. You know, if this was an SRF and it was a 10% principal forgiveness, the expectation would be, you know, that the ask for the grant would be similar to that. You know, why would you look for more grant for this program versus the SRF? You know, again, that just shows a more thorough and comprehensive application. If anybody can hear me. Am I alone?
There's a problem with audio right now. Aaron and Mike are both struggling.
Okay.
And I don't see
I'm
Rick
back.
there. Oh, there's
Mike is
that's
back.
good. And Rick, we've lost Rick. I don't see him.
Okay.
So
Can you hear me?
give him a minute.
Yep. I just heard Rick.
We could hear you.
Okay, I'm here. You know, Marco, one of the things that I think is important, so, you know, the source of supply, maybe there's an opportunity for them to break that piece off and say, look, this is why we're struggling with our supply, and maybe we break off, and if you can help us out with that piece, recognizing that these other components are something that we should be taking on. So, you know, I just point that out, that maybe there's an opportunity to break out, you know, pieces of these and ask. Then the ask might be a little different than the whole project.
Yep, agreed. And I think, right, it's very important, though, for the commission to understand all of the work that is going into it. You know, so if that section gets pulled off and we don't know about it, because again, we're reading that application at face value, we would want to know that the system is actually taking on all of this other investment, right? The main replacement, the pump house rehab. We would want to know all of that, and that would be certainly more favorable on the loan application if they did want to separate that out. It shows a thorough application and a good thought process, and that's something that would be very positive to the commission.
Yeah, okay. Go to the next one.
Sorry,
She's back.
technology. I'm in the office and I'm connected to the internet, and I just got kicked off everything. So, can you hear me?
We got
Yes, we
you.
can.
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay.
There is a
All right.
question.
So, okay. Thanks, Paige.
Um,
Fire away.
Is the updated system characteristics data being captured in the rates dashboard?
What does that mean?
I don't know.
Louise,
Are you talking?
are you available to answer that question, Louise?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't understand the first part.
Is the updated system characteristics data being captured on the rates dashboard?
I think what they're trying to allude to is
Oh,
are the MHI and the affordability index being reflected on the water rates dashboard that we have, the interactive dashboard. And if that's the question, yes, it's kind of complicated to answer. Yes and no. Yes, because we have a 2018 affordability index in there. So if you have updated your water rates since 2018, it's not being captured accurately. We are in the process right now, actually, as we speak, we're gonna probably in the next week or two, we're gonna be sending out emails to all of the water systems to do a update to that water dashboard. So stay tuned. We'll be collecting more information, and we're going to update that in the near future, so you could see that affordability index being reflected for your community on the dashboard. If you have any further questions on that, please do reach out to me directly. I could hopefully answer better offline.
great. Thanks, Louise.
Yeah, Jason said that's the perfect answer. So I do have another question to follow up on that. And the question is, can a small community water system prefer a loan from the trust fund versus SRF because of reporting requirements and vendor selection? And I can't hear a word Rick's saying.
Rick,
Yeah.
we can't.
Rick, can you reset your auto?
Yeah, I'll jump in while we're waiting for Rick. So in the past, the commission has made it a policy not to supplant other funding sources. So if a system is on the funded portion for SRF, the commission knows that that's a public list. And then they would, in the past, have not offered loans for a project that's on the SRF. In addition, the trust fund interest rate is a higher interest rate than SRF, and that's intended to account for the federal provisions. So the Davis-Bacon wage rates, the American iron and steel, those reporting requirements. Vendor selection would be the same requirements for both programs. It's a competitive bidding process, so that wouldn't change between the two.
Okay, can you hear me now, Marco?
Yep,
Thank you very much. Okay. Technology.
I know, we've come so far in 2020 just to go backwards.
That's right. So this is the big five. Contamination was the first one on the big five. So this, Marco, this could be an opportunity for someone they could seek a loan or a loan grant from the trust fund. If you could provide any feedback on this one here.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we would want to see, right? So on this one, if we use this one as an example, face value, so we know the arsenic is going to be changing. And on this one, it was they missed the SRF deadline. So we know we've got a compliance date of July 1 of next year. So this needs to happen. So basically what it is now we're looking at a different funding source. So, now we're looking at what is the ask. Is it loan only or is it, grant loan? So same process that the commission is looking for. So we're looking at it. We see the AI is up a bit at 1.8. So did they do their homework and are they asking for outside funding first and justify that amount? Again, so if you did apply for SRF, you missed the deadline, this system missed the deadline. Had you been successful on it, what would that have been relative to, say, principal forgiveness versus loan? And really the ask should be, if you want to be successful, is similar to what that would be. This is just simply a different funding source, right, that is available to it. But that's what the commission would be looking for is, was the homework done? Was outside funding applied for first? And we know on this one, you missed the SRF deadline, so we don't know what the answer would be there. But yeah, this is one that we would certainly want to take in and review.
Yeah, and we recognize that some of you out there watching this webinar, I might be in this exact position with your project. The commission has funded plenty of projects with arsenic issues, iron, manganese. They've also funded plenty of man-made contaminants as well. So, they recognize that, the systems do require this type of work. I think kind of what Marco is getting, if you're coming in again as an annual round, the point is to incentivize that outside funding. Can you contribute a little bit to this project? What can you take on as a loan? The rates are going to be really low. This is kind of in that realm of, asset management, maintenance, making sure you have high water quality. It's a little different conversation than if you had somebody contaminate your well due to manufacturing processes, that man-made contamination. But it all does get looked at in that same discussion when we talk about contamination. So, I think as Marco was saying, I wouldn't come in thinking, well, it's contamination, I'm going to ask for 100% grant for this project, because I'm pretty sure it will not get supported by the commission. However, if it says, look, we recognize we missed the deadline, you know, there is a deadline that we have to get this project done, so there is some time critical aspect. We're willing to take on a loan. We're willing to take on a loan with 10% grants. You know, that's where you should be thinking about this type of project. Obviously, if the need is very great, the grant is completely justified, well, then that conversation might be a little bit different. But at face value, you should really assess where you're at as far as affording this project.
There's another question.
Yep.
If they request a grant amount on the application and the committee doesn't agree with the number, is it possible for them to offer a different lower grant amount, or does the application just get declined?
Yeah, so the commission from day one has basically stated the application is at face value. I'm trying to think, the first year we really did this, we had 88 applications. If the commission started going back to all the applicants and saying, well, that's a good project, but we really wish you asked for less grant, you know, that the process would never move forward. So yeah, we recognize it puts you in a very difficult position, but that's why this messaging is do what you can, you know, be ready with what you're asking and really justify that grant. If you think that there's a reason that you wouldn't, that you're like, well, actually, if I got more loan, that would be okay too. You might want to go and hedge your bet in that direction, because you know, unless you have that big five, unless you're really bringing in a lot of funding sources, you know, you should be probably a little more conservative with that grant request. We have had projects that came in with the funding plan asked for 50-50 grant loan, and that project was denied. And then they came back as a special project because they did have a time critical aspect to their project. They really needed to move forward with this work. And when they came back as a special project, they had significantly changed their funding request. They had decided, you know, they had accepted the SRF money that they were offered. Their community had voted to take on the $1 million loan and bond that. They reached out to CDBG and were basically going through that application process for funding to assist with some septic system work and also water line work. So now they had some match grant funding. Then they came to the trust fund with that gap number and said, okay, we did everything. We have a critical project. We got these other funding sources, and now this is the number that we need. And they were approved for that funding earlier this year. They were one of the special projects that were approved. You know, so if your project truly needs that, you know, a no doesn't preclude coming back as a special project, but there has to be a significant driver to be accepted as a special project. So I know that was kind of a long answer to the question.
But a good one, but very good.
Aaron, can I do a follow-up on that?
Mm-hmm. Yep, go ahead, Louise.
I think it is, you know, Cindy and I talked about, me and Marco have talked a lot about project ready and being preparedness and all that stuff. And I think it is important especially for the small communities, to take the time to go through the business plan, do their asset management, do whatever you need to do in order to figure out what is that number that you could get to where you feel comfortable in borrowing and being able to pay back and all that stuff. So in order for you to get to that point, you really need to do that expenses and revenue spreadsheet that we talked about, Cindy talked about, and to really dive into what the condition of your assets are. So it takes a little bit of preparation. It takes a little bit of legwork up front to really provide the committee a full picture of what your system looks like and what you could afford and what can you really take on. If you can't take on anything else like this one and the previous one, their AI is really high, and $1,000 rates for a community that's 55,000 MHI, that's quite a bit. And not to mention, you probably have some other loans that are already attached to your community. So if you could show the big picture, you'd be better off. And that's my suggestion. Do a little bit of legwork up front, be prepared, and then come in with the applications.
Excellent. That's a great point, Louise. I think Paige has one more question for this one, and then we have one more case study to talk about. So these are excellent questions, and yeah, great job, panelists. So Paige, fire away with the next question.
Carrie was wondering if you can request a loan only without looking for outside funding.
Yeah, so based on attachment D, if you haven't looked at outside funding, you are a loan only, not, again, no other drivers, because even in attachment D, we talk about we've funded plenty of projects that didn't have outside funding, but they probably had a very significant driver that led to that decision by the commission. But if you are coming in asset management or even, you know, a small treatment system or something, you probably are looking at a loan only if you didn't really do anything else that would incentivize that grant funding. So I mean, for me, like, that key word is the incentive for the grant is you've done the other things or you're meeting that big five. So, so yeah, a loan only, again, it doesn't guarantee funding. The meritorious aspect of that project is competitive against the others. But we did have a special project come in this winter for a system that was in a critical need for water, and they requested a loan with a 10% grant on it. And, you know, it was very valid. It had a strong need, and that was approved. So, so yes, loan only is good. All right, we good? All right, last one. And thanks for hanging out with us. And yeah, sorry about some of the technical issues we're experiencing. So Mike Unger, you want to fire away with this one?
Sure, yeah. So this is a new source project. They are looking to develop a new well to supplement existing supply capacity. It includes the infrastructure to connect it to the system. It's coming out of their capital improvement and asset management plans. You can see the costs, and then they've done the footwork for outside funding. They've received a CDBG grant, and they've applied to USDA Rural Development. But based on conversations with RD, they've been told they're eligible for a loan only. So they are seeking a grant from the trust fund to offset some of that loan, reduce the amount they would have to repay and the burden on the ratepayers.
All right, Rick.
The first thing that I would look at is, so it's developing a new production well to supplement the existing supply. And is there any potential expansion, any businesses that are looking to capitalize on that expansion and that need the additional supply? And if there are so, then maybe that there are some opportunities to seek some outside funding from that entity, which would really improve the application, because it looks like they've got CDBG grant, they've applied to USDA Rural Development, and they've applied for the SRF, and also they're looking at Northern Borders Regional Commission, which is a relatively, it's not a new organization, but they've recently come into some funding. So they're touching all the bases there. But again, I go back to, you know, what is the driver for the new production well? Is it they're losing their existing supply capabilities? Are they just planning for the future and growth? Or is there a specific, you know, entity they're targeting that needs the supply to move into their community? And that's something that the commission, I believe, would really want to know about. Marco, I could.
Yep, Rick, you hit on all of it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, so one of the things that we would be looking at, you know, why are we doing this? And sometimes it may be just for economic development. You know, a community wants to grow, so they want to increase their supply. And if that were the case, that's okay. You know, the story is the story. Then we would look at, obviously, then there should be investment by that community. So we would look at that funding piece. You know, where is their skin in the game with their investment to increase the capacity of their system for economic development? So that's would need to be in the description as well. What's driving this? Is it a replacement of an old one, or is it expansion of the system? So if we were looking at this is an expansion of the system for economic development purposes, then right, we'd be asking the questions and taking a look at, what is the community putting in to the system, that they're not just asking for straight grant. We see from the outside funding sources, they've exhausted quite a bit, a lot of effort there, loan only on the USDA. The AI is 1.7 is up there, right? So they're paying a decent water rate. So this is one that the commission would certainly look at, and relative to the other applicants. So it's a decent application with a little bit more explanation in the description itself. It'd be something we'd definitely look at.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to project readiness, it hits all those aspects. Thinking about the big five and what this project has done, it might not hit all of them, but it shows the effort. And we talked about this application. It is your best foot forward to just get in front of the commission. And one of these, even looking at this, we talked about it yesterday. Did the town have they put any money to actually evaluating that site? Have they done pumping tests? What has been their contribution to this project? They've done $300,000 of work to get to the point where they're ready to design and install the production well. I mean, that is their contribution. You can capture that funding, and the commission will look at that. We had a project that was approved last year with a lot of work that the municipality or the water precinct had done leading to their application. So, again, your application is face value. So the planning document, the application itself, that's where you really need to be thorough and put this information in there. I mean, we're not asking for a huge report, but you've got the purpose and need. We've done all of this work to find a new supply capacity. The budget and the funding plan, we've engaged the stakeholders, and we're going to recoup 30% in new water fees. All of that information is really important. I've sat in, I don't know how many meetings. Rick has sat in, I don't know how many commission meetings, and they ask those questions. Oh, well, they're expanding the system. Well, who are they expanding it to, and where is their contribution? They did X, Y, and Z. Where is that? We do our best to help them, and work through some of that. But if you don't put that information in there, nobody is going to know that information. So really think about your project and those aspects. And I can tell you there was another project that was similar to bringing in a source, getting community economic development, and that project became a special project because their application just didn't really, it wasn't completely thought out. It had a lot of good merits to the application. They recognized that there was this potential for stakeholder involvement in the commission. They really just kind of talked about it, and they said, we don't want to say no, this is a good project. We see the potential, but the applicant has some work to do, but we don't want to shut the door on it completely, and we're going to move that to the special project pile. So, again, being thorough with those applications allows those discussions to occur. So we can just keep saying that over and over again, be thorough and provide all of that information. So,
and one other comment on this project is that if the utility hasn't even identified where that new source of supply is coming from, then I think it's very premature for them to applying for the 2.5 million. And so that's something you got to think about. Do you take it piece by piece, because it's clearly you're not at the very end, you're ready to proceed if they haven't even identified where that new source of supply is going to be. And that's something that I think that, I have heard the commission is that we're ready, you're ready to go, we're ready the money to be spent. It's not a 5-year project that we're looking to just bank the money now. So I think that's a message to be conveyed too. Yep.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, speaks to the whole project readiness, right, that we've been kind of talking about throughout the presentation. Yeah, that hits it right on the money.
Yep. So, Paige, are there any other questions?
There are no hands up and no questions.
Excellent. So, well, thank you, everybody, for coming on this webinar journey with us today and suffering through some of the technical difficulties we had for a few minutes there. We really appreciate all the questions and really hope that you benefited from the discussions here today. Thank you to Marco and Rick, Louise, Mike Unger, and Cindy, who were part of this panel today. Thank you to Paige in the background helping bring your questions forward. I think with that, we'll conclude the webinar. We'll do some housekeeping and send you the links and information out so that you have it to review. And we all are here to assist you, to help you through this process and work with you. Reminder, the deadline is September 10th, 2020. So if you haven't started thinking about it, go over there and just try to bring everything we talked about today to your application process. And, you know, we have a corpus right now. The money is, you know, 20% every year. Don't send something that is not ready. You know, think about that readiness concept and then think about our program and everything you've learned. So thank you very much. And anybody else from the panelists want to say anything?
All set.
No,
All right.
yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody that tuned in. It was great attendance. So hopefully we answered a lot of questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Paige, we'll let you close it out.